If I've learned anything these past few months, and by extension the entire console generation, it's that Nintendo was right. Let's back things up for a second. For years, Nintendo has been scrutinized for making consoles less powerful than the competition. The Wii was a machine for babies that couldn't produce HD visuals. The Wii U chose a Fisher-Price tablet screen over PS4 level specs. And the Switch is just a toaster that makes Mortal Kombat look like nightmare fuel. So why does Nintendo do this? Why do they embarrass themselves by releasing subpar hardware alongside powerhouses like the PS5 and Xbox Series X? Seriously, these two systems wipe the floor with the Switch, and Nintendo should feel ashamed of releasing a console that doesn't support 4K 120fps minimum. Everyone knows graphics are more important than gameplay. Alright, let's snap back to reality. The point is, Nintendo knew that simply creating powerful hardware wouldn't help them in the long run. In a way, they promised to their fans and the industry that they would provide platforms with unique ideas instead of simply making more powerful machines. Not to say they haven't made a few mistakes along the way, but experimentation like this bred the Nintendo Switch, which became the third best-selling console of all time and resulted in Nintendo becoming the most profitable they've ever been, all while having the weakest console on the market. They really adopted this philosophy during the DS and Wii era nearly 20 years ago. In this time, the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 were blowing the minds of consumers with some cutting-edge technology. Games were looking more real than ever before, all displaying at a crisp 720p. HD gaming was here, but Nintendo seemed behind the curve with the DS compared to the PSP, and even more with the Wii compared to the HD competition. It was barely more powerful than the GameCube, still standard definition, and it had a TV remote for a controller. Plus, it was marketed towards the filthy casuals. The little kids, the grandmas, people with very limited gaming experience. It wasn't hardcore enough for the gamers who were growing up and playing those mature, realistic games. Even though the Wii was an insane commercial success, outselling the 360 and PS3, it still wasn't viewed favorably by non-Nintendo fans and even the mainstream media to an extent. Heck, I don't even remember Wii games taking part in many Game Awards nominations. Well, at that point they were owned by Spike TV, so what'd you expect? Still, I'm sure Nintendo didn't care at all about being the face of modern gaming or whatever. They were playing the long game, with ideas like the Wii and Wii U, even though the latter was far from a success. I mean, just listen to what former Nintendo of America president Reggie Fils-Aimé had to say about the competition. The graveyard of any industry is filled with the headstones of companies who decided to keep doing things the same old way, playing only on the margin, making things just a little bit better. That strategy works. For a while, but ultimately, it's fatal. Wow, that's a very accurate statement. When did he say this anyway? A few years back? Maybe when the Switch came out? No. He said this in 2006, on stage at E3 promoting the Wii. He elaborated on this further, saying this about Super Mario 64.
That leap to a revolutionary form of gaming wasn't really about the looks. It was about the feel. Moving your character and your viewpoint independently in any direction, all in real time. And the memory of that moment was also the starting point for Wii. How do we make games that feel entirely new all over again?
You see, Nintendo knew during the very conception of 3D gaming that it was important to have great gameplay over great visuals, something the competitors seem to have forgotten in recent years. Of course, PlayStation and Xbox aren't dead, but they're not in great spots. The PlayStation 5 has been selling well, but nearly 4 years on the market, and it only has around 10 exclusive games to show for it. Most of the big PlayStation Studios games have also been released on PS4, so what's the point of getting a PS5 other than to have better graphics? And don't even get me started on Xbox. Microsoft has been buying studio after studio with very little to show for it. And even if one of their studios releases a hit, that doesn't mean they won't get shut down anyway. Why is this happening? There are many factors at play here, but two major problems are long development times and huge development costs. Making AAA games for these powerful consoles is a long and expensive affair, with budgets skyrocketing close to the billion mark and development time taking half a decade minimum. As a result, these companies are less inclined to take risks on games that aren't guaranteed hits, and when a game fails to meet absurd sales expectations, layoffs occur or studios get shut down. Honestly though, Hi-Fi Rush was a hit, so I don't know why Tango Gameworks had to get dissolved. Still, this is unsustainable, and if more powerful consoles mean longer and more expensive game development, then why even come out with new consoles? Seriously, video games already look real enough. How many polygons can you keep adding? Nintendo is not affected nearly as much by these issues. Because Switch is not a powerful machine in comparison, games aren't as expensive or time-consuming to create for it. Though they still look good, they're not as graphically intensive, meaning developers can spend more time in making their games play great instead of just look great. Though there are exceptions, like the highly complex Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, the latter of which was praised by developers for what it accomplished on then 6-year-old hardware. Because of this, Nintendo's many teams and external studios can put out multiple games in a single console generation. You know, kind of like how things used to be. What's also interesting is that Nintendo is more profitable than PlayStation in particular, because even though the latter had higher sales this past fiscal year, their operating profit was half of Nintendo's thanks to the astronomical budgets of PlayStation Studios games. Just goes to show the detrimental and unsustainable state AAA development is in. That isn't to say Nintendo is completely immune to the issues PlayStation and Xbox are facing. In the latest investor Q&A, President Shuntaro Furukawa said that game development will inevitably become longer, more complex, and more sophisticated in the future, and they will continue to invest and expand their development resources. Perhaps a sign of this is that their overall output has already decreased this generation, despite merging their handheld and home console platforms into one. Journalist Steve Totillo equated this to Nintendo likely feeling less inclined to make smaller, bite-sized games that used to be on dedicated handhelds like the DS and 3DS. Honestly, even though their overall game output is slowing down, they're still doing a way better job at providing a vast quantity of quality games than Xbox and PlayStation, and they're delivering more games on a single platform than they ever have before. Perhaps as a result of this more mindful approach, Nintendo has also largely been able to avoid the layoffs that have plagued a ton of other companies, barring one event in 2014 involving 320 Nintendo of Europe employees, but thanks to the position they're in now, due to the Switch's success and inexpensive development costs, their employees get to keep their jobs, whereas other game companies pour hundreds of millions into game development, and when their game isn't a success, the employees are the ones to suffer, which in the end is the result of corporate greed. When Nintendo fell on hard times during the Wii U and 3DS era, the president and CEO Satoru Iwata cut his pay in half because he knew that game developers wouldn't be able to do great work if they were worried about losing their jobs. Man, if only every other CEO held the same values. If you agree with that, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Anyway, Nintendo's promise of interesting hardware instead of more powerful hardware has paid off in spades for everyone. They experimented with every console to the point where they hit a gold mine with the Switch, which trades off horsepower for portability. And because it's not that powerful of a system, it's actually easier for Nintendo's in-house developers to make games on, unlike the PS5 and Xbox Series X, which takes hundreds of millions of dollars and around 5 years to make one game for them. One. We're seeing the results of this with few AAA releases and even fewer risky endeavors. The Switch does not have this problem, with at least one exclusive game releasing what feels like every month. Now, what does this mean for Switch 2? Nintendo themselves admitted they see future games taking longer to develop with new hardware, but honestly, I don't see them fall into the same pit as PlayStation and Xbox. They'll still have a lot of development teams in the next generation that I'm willing to bet will put out more quality exclusives than the competition, even if it's not as frequent as it was on Switch. There will also be lots of support from third-party and indie developers, because you know they're going to want to jump on that Switch 2 bandwagon. all the third-party devs who aren't currently developing Switch 1 games are going to get in on Switch 2 as soon as they can. I guarantee there will be no shortage of games for the Switch successor in the first few years. And even though it'll be a more complex system to develop for than the current Switch, developing games for it will still be significantly less complicated and expensive than on PS5 and Series X. There's always a chance that I'm wrong and the Switch 2 could be a complete failure, but I think Nintendo is going in the right direction here. They don't need their new console to be as powerful as a PS5 because this generation is proving that hardware doesn't mean jack if you don't have the software to back it up. The Switch 2 should still be more powerful than the Switch 1 to get those partners on board, but the focus should always be on how the games feel, not look. That's been Nintendo's philosophy this whole time. You could have the best looking game in the world, but if it's not fun, why bother? Hey, that's another Reggie quote.
If it's not fun, why bother?
It's exciting to see what the future holds for Switch 2, and if PlayStation and Xbox continue down this graphics-obsessed road, Nintendo might once again dominate the console market with yet another underpowered machine.